Welcome to episode 6, Chronicles of UK Salafism and Insider Perspective. In this particular episode, I will focus on the year 1995 and what transpired throughout. And my archives show that on the 8th of January, Sheikh Suhaib Hassan visited Brixton Mosque to deliver a lesson entitled The Explanation of Sahih Muslim, one of the most authentic canons of hadith collection in Sunni Islam. And Sheikh Suhaib attending the mosque was seen by some, including myself, as an endorsement and support of the new leadership and management that had assumed responsibility and position of the mosque and its community the previous year. By the end of that month, however, we were struck with a tragedy which reverberated across the community and beyond. And that was as a result of the death of Surah Abdul Malik's wife, Aisha Abdul Malik. On the 29th of January, she died after a relatively short illness, which was unforeseen. And it shocked all of us because our expectations were, in actuality, that Surat, due to his deteriorating health, would possibly be one who would pass, and not his wife at all, until this illness that she contracted rapidly deteriorated her condition. The janaza, the funeral, was very, very well attended, and she was buried in what is now known as Garden of Peace in Site H31. After this period of grieving and sadness and shock, the community tried to move forward with a lot of activity as it related to learning. But before going on to describing that process, Aisha was very popular amongst all of the converts who came to Islam and those second, third generation sisters who joined the community, for the simple reason that she epitomized what a Salafi woman looked like, behaved like, in her character, in her embrace of new Muslims, in her proactivity, and in her vision. Her relationship with her husband was one that was very strong, in which she was very supportive of him and vice versa. And she was a doting mother over her children, one of whom was disabled. So her going was a blow to women who saw her as a role model of how to be as a convert Salafi woman within the context of a Western society. Moving on with the classes, on the 2nd of March, a lesson was delivered by an individual called Abdul on the etiquettes of differing. We then moved to April, 14th of April, and by this time Abu Usamah At-Thahabi had joined the community and was becoming a full-time imam among us. And these were exciting times at this stage because the process of learning that I've mentioned was intense. We were developing our identities, the duality of our identities as Salafi Muslims and Britons as well. And so learning how to navigate that as we moved through the second stage of the cognitive development process that I've mentioned from my PhD, that activism that was there, we were learning abstract concepts of the religion and grappling with how to actualize those within society and to navigate with our non-Muslim members of our family and friends with this new identity. And on the 14th of April, as I've mentioned, he gave a lecture on the tafsir of the 18th chapter of the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf. And this was to be the first of many lectures on this particular science. The next lesson he delivered was on the 19th of April, and this was on jihad. And I have two cassettes, parts 1 and 2, regarding this subject. What is interesting, I noticed as I was looking at my notes, is that another huge event took place, global event took place on that same day, and that was the Oklahoma bombing, the culprit being Timothy McVeigh and one other individual, in which 168 individuals, people were killed and more than 500 injured. And one may look with a cursory glance thinking that this lecture on jihad was given due to the Oklahoma bombing. No, that was not the case at all. If you listen to the lecture, it was being given unaffected by this particular event. And if we were to look at the factors that may have spurred Abu Usama to give this particular lecture, it was none other than the rising popularity of some of the extremist protagonists in London and the UK, such as Abdul al Faisal, who, as I'd mentioned in a previous podcast, had been expelled from Brixton. And he had set up weekly study circles by hiring a hall in the local Ferndale Sports Centre. And there was a school that he would attend once in a while after school and have a hall there, or he would go to the town hall and rent that out occasionally. And he was attracting some of the local community that remained still attached, who were still attached to him due to his personality, his charisma, and such like, and began questioning our narrative and our position regarding the religion, regarding the understanding of jihad. So, again, the fact that this domestic terrorist act took place in America and on the other side of the waters, we're having a lesson on jihad are totally unrelated incidents in that particular instance. I next move to notes from, or cassette rather, where Abu Osama had embarked upon teaching another canon of hadith, the more authentic collection of Bukhari, and lesson two took place on the 25th of September. On the 26th of September, he'd continued with lesson two, again with science of Quran, and he was looking at the second chapter, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 259. Now, I won't go through every lecture and every cassette that I have here. I've been reviewing my archives, which includes more than 550 cassettes. So I think it's unnecessary to go through all of the details and all of the dates of these particular cassettes, but to show the listener that these are some of the records that are being referred to and the content of the lectures as well. So in October, Abu Osama actually delivered 12 classes on science of the Quran, again, different verses, Bukhari, the canon of Hadith collection, and he continued with that. He also began to conduct a sisters question and answer session where sisters would come and sit and ask any question they could. And had he not researched it the week before, he would go away and research and then deliver the responses for them. But most of the time, he was able to address some of the more rudimentary questions that were being asked in these sessions. So 12 lessons, 12 classes he conducted in October. In moving, and the last one he gave was in Croydon for that month, which was the 28th. And that was the special characteristics of the Prophet. The congregation was largely South Asian. I remember attending that particular lecture as well. And then in November, he delivered two lectures. One was on the 1st of November, the Aqidah of Sufyan al-Thawri, one of our pious predecessors. And that, so the ideology of this great leader, this great scholar, was discussed, and how it was relevant with us in that time as Muslims. And then on the 17th of November, he delivered a lecture entitled The Rights of the Children on Parents. Now, I will only refer to two more talks given in that particular year. One would be an undated one in 1995 by Sheikh Abdullah Al-Fawsi, and that was on the manhaj of Salafism, the methodology and the approach in disseminating knowledge in Islam. Sheikh Abdullah Al Farsi was a scholar from Kuwait. December 95, we had another talk entitled The Imitation of the Non-Muslims. You may recall from the previous podcast, I delivered a study circle on that, a very basic study circle. And so we got a more insightful, detailed lecture on this from Sheikh Ahmed Awais. And this was beneficial because he was able to expound upon how, again, we navigate our identities, the duality of our identities as Muslim and convert Muslims and British citizens in that instance. Now, this period of learning, I would dare say, was unparalleled across London and parts of the UK, because we had students of knowledge visiting, because we had a resident student of knowledge and graduate from Medina who was strong. And also the fact that he was African American resonated very strongly with this convert community in Brixton. You'll recall that the elders before the Salafi contingent took over the leadership of the mosque were very actively looking for African Caribbean black students to come and teach due to the racism they had experienced from the various communities around the UK. The South Asian predominantly were the ones they faced this racism from. So when we came in as converts in the 1990s, they were actively looking for people from the same backgrounds or similar backgrounds. Hence the mistakes they made with introducing and inviting Abdul Malik, a Trinidadi, into the community to teach his open-ended teachings and the concept of Dar al-Harb, a place of war in the UK. Hence the mistake they made with not properly vetting Abdullah al-Faisal when he purported that he had come from King Fahd University in Riyadh. So Abu Usama being among us as Salafis was very exciting, and the period of learning that we were going through was a very intense, I would say, enjoyable phase of learning. Now, the activities in the mosque at the time, as we were growing, I introduced monthly community dinners in which the community could come together, enjoy and fraternize with each other, have a meal, listen to a general talk, and they could bring non-Muslim family members or friends who could learn about Islam and basically take part, participate in the general ambiance of what was taking place on that occasion. Brixton Mosque was well known for many years, up until that point, as a place where immigrants, those coming from North Africa and elsewhere, could come and spend a few nights if they were homeless or didn't have any place of abode to go to. So we were an informal refugee accommodation service, and we liaised with some of the homeless shelters in the area to find these individual homes as well. We had a popular kitchen and canteen that became renowned not only in London, others would travel down from Leeds and elsewhere because they would come on a Friday, a Jummah particularly, or over the weekend, because there were a lot of discussion, activity, lively debate, and a generally warm atmosphere that would prevail in the mosque on weekends and most times. The Muslim presence, as I've mentioned again in Brixton, became more prominent physically, I think, due to because of the appearance, and also due to the increased conversions that were taking place. Many were beginning to come into the mosque to convert to Islam as well. Now, some of the challenges I want to address, I think it's important that we look at that at this particular stage. On the wider scene, JIMAS was splintering, and there were challenges for Abu Muntazir in that he saw disillusionment with his style of leadership at that particular time. We had others wanting to do their own thing. I had become chairman of Brixton Mosque, and I remember being asked or invited to bring Brixton Mosque under JIMAS, and that was something it was impossible. I said, Brixton Mosque is a community, and there's no way it will come under any auspices of an organization. At the same time, Jamia Ihya Tarath, a Kuwaiti organization, was making its presence and establishing itself in the UK, in London. And so it gravitated towards the Salafi community and made offers of finances and things like this to try and join up or consolidate its position in the UK at that particular time. And Sheikh Abdullah As-Sabt was an individual who was a member of them. And in Kuwait itself, there was Sheikh Abdurrahman Abdul Khalik, who presided over the organization as well. And there were a lot of doubts and concerns because of the partisan nature and the objective of this organization, which was mirroring JIMAS actually, and this is was one of the main reasons for the problem with JIMAS, that it calling to Islam pure and simple, or was it calling to the objectives of the organization? So Jamia Ihya Tarath and JIMAS had parallel issues with regards to what were they calling to alongside Islam, or were they calling to fulfill the objectives of the organizational criteria? So those were problems there. But generally, many of us members of JIMAS were gravitating away from JIMAS as an entity, and we sought advice from Sheikh Al-Albani via his students, and they advised us to be patient. But they were speaking with Abu Muntazir. We also sought advice from Sheikh Suhaib. Now, this is a key point before we draw to a conclusion. Despite the splintering and the fractures, there was no discussion amongst us as Salafis at that time to break away, even though we were gravitating away, and set up another entity. This was not taking place. I was on the Shura, if you want, the committee, management committee of JIMAS, and I do not recall having those discussions with any of the colleagues from different parts of the country. However, as will be seen in the next podcast, there was a new kid on the block, Abdul Wahid Alam Abu Khadijah, on his return from a conference with Abu Muntazir in America, I think towards the end of 95 or 96, he contacted me. I remember him contacting me and asking me to take over the helm of JIMAS, which I was very surprised at and rejected immediately by retorting, I'm already responsible for a community in Brixton and I'm not looking at any leadership of anything else in that instance. I don't remember how we left that conversation, but that was something that horrified me, to be frank. That was possibly the indicator or precursor to his ambitions, as we will see when I discuss 1996 and the emergence of cultist tendencies among a few who started gravitating around this particular character, and when we started seeing the vitriol being directed inwardly towards fellow Salafis in order to browbeat them to join, and if not join, question whether they were Salafis. I think that it should suffice that we discuss that in the next podcast, because a lot of detail will be given and archival detail will be referred to as well. Before concluding, I've already mentioned the world event with the Oklahoma bombing. On the 11th of July, 7,000 Bosnian Muslim men were massacred in a so-called UN safe haven of Srebrenica. And this sent alarm bells and rage throughout the Muslim community that this could happen, that the UN, which many thought were complicit in allowing this to happen. We already spoke previously and looked at the massacres that took place in Bosnia in the earlier 90s with the Balkans conflict, and the images that we were seeing being via video, and those of us who went over. So to see this take place a few years later under a so-called safe haven was something that gave the perception to Muslims that really we were cannon fodder and were not being afforded the rights and protection that should be afforded, whether it was there in the Balkans or anywhere else across Europe. And I'll conclude on that. As I've said, 1996 is going to look at further splintering of the Salafis, and the emergence of individuals who took the Salafi movement in an altogether different direction, of which we are still suffering the negative, divisive, toxic results today.